Hello, and welcome to the AgileAssets Product Showcase webinar series. AgileAssets hosts these webinars monthly on the different products and services offered by AgileAssets. My name is Barry Raskin. I'm the Marketing Director here at AgileAssets. For the next hour, we will be presenting an overview of the AgileAssets Maintenance Manager module. At the end of this webinar, you should understand why and when this MMS system might be used, comprehend the high-level components, benefits, and features of this system, know which core business processes are supported, and appreciate how this system will help you more efficiently and effectively do your job. Our presenter today is Dr. Charles Pilson from AgileAssets. Charles has over 25 years of experience in the field of civil engineering transportation since graduating from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. As a civil engineering consultant, he worked in the areas of economic analysis, geometric, and pavement design before receiving his master's and PhD from the University of Texas in Austin. Soon after, he joined AgileAssets, implementing asset management software for various state and other agencies throughout the country. Currently, Charles is the product manager for the manager suite of AgileAssets products. With that, I'll hand over control to Charles.
Good morning, everybody. Well, morning for some folks, I guess, and afternoon for some folks if you're on the East Coast. So very good to have everybody, and I think let's get right into it here. Obviously, we're going to concentrate today on the maintenance management system, but you'll see a little bit later on that this kind of applies largely to our whole manager series of products. But let's dive right in here and get started. So the first thing is that ultimately the market problem out there, if you want to look at it that way, is that there's a lot of transportation agencies out there, and they're all challenged with managing, in many cases, a sizable number of assets that they own or at least are responsible for, and they need to know, how much maintenance work is required annually to be able to keep them in a state of good repair. And of course, they've got to manage all the execution of that work, the coordination and execution of that work, and be able to really look at their budgets. It's always about the bottom line, and that bottom line is typically dollars. So the software solution that we have at AgileAssets here, called our Maintenance Manager product, is really the answer to that market problem. And we're trying to really enable agencies to make better decisions and really manage that portfolio of assets that they have or that they're responsible for, and ultimately to make the most of those available resources that they have available to them. So that's their actual labor, their equipment, their materials, but also their money. So what the AgileAssets Maintenance Manager is a fully featured and very configurable, and I'll come back to that on probably many occasions during this presentation, but it's geared to be an enterprise-class maintenance management system. It's scalable to large-size enterprises, and really it's about tracking inventory, tracking the performance of that asset inventory, planning that maintenance work, and then, of course, tracking that work as part of the day-to-day operations. Ultimately, though, it really enables agencies to justify required funding levels that they really need to be able to attain specific levels of service for the maintenance of their assets, and really be able to create long-term maintenance plans that maximize that level of service. So that they can really do the best possible job they can with the amount of funds that they are allocated. So the AgileAssets product portfolio in general is split up into various kind of tiers almost. And at the bottom there, the core system foundational tier, that is where a lot of stuff is happening, and whatever module you have with AgileAssets, you always have that core system foundation. The kind of next level up that we typically talk about is your manager products, the AgileAssets Manager products, and that's where we are. That's what we're going to be talking about today. But on top of that, you've also got what we call our analyst products, And the difference between our analyst products and our manager products is really at its core the way we track performance for assets. So on the manager side, we're more concentrating on maintenance. We're more concentrating on kind of operations, day-to-day maintenance of those assets. And when we're looking towards planning, we're planning on the basis of not just one individual sign at a time. We're really planning on the basis of all the signs on your interstates in this county, let's say. On the analyst side, though, for our analyst products, those are things like our pavement management system, our bridge management system. In those cases, you're really looking at individual assets, so one asset. So not just a group of signs, but a single bridge or a single pavement section. And then you're really looking at the deterioration or the performance of that pavement section over time, and you're doing all your optimization on the basis of that one pavement section, and then being able to really go system-wide with that analysis. So that's the basic difference between analyst products and manager products. And then right at the top there, we have what we call our trade-off analyst. And in that case, what you're doing is really pulling together all your different programs. So you're really trying to do a good job of working out what sort of budget you should have in your bridge program versus what budget you should have in your pavement program, for instance. All right, so on the next slide here, we're going to see a slightly more detailed version of the previous one. So you can still see that pyramid there with the foundation at the bottom, the manager series in blue, the analyst series in green, and then the trade-off analyst at the top there. You can see that right at the very bottom, that kind of core foundation really does a lot of the most basic sort of processes, or handles a lot of the basic processes in the system, things like linear referencing, things like mapping, those kind of things. We also see out there to the right the ability to see these things on various different devices. This is a totally web-based product, in case any of you guys don't know out there. So it is really accessible by browser, no plugins required. And then we also, right at the very top there, have various standalone mobile solutions that we can talk about right at the end of this presentation. All right, so where we're going to concentrate today is in this manager series block here, and then specifically we're going to talk about maintenance manager, the maintenance manager product, although this does have a lot of sort of bleed out into various other of the manager products. All right, so the key concepts here are really revolving around our assets. And when we talk about that first block there, we're talking about our asset inventory and the performance of those assets. And so it's really asking or answering the question, allowing you to answer the question about what kind of assets do I own? What do I actually have? What am I responsible for in my organization in general? Who specifically is responsible for them within my organization? What kind of attributes do they have? What do all those assets look like? What kind of shapes do they have? What size are they? What particular METCD codes do they have? That kind of stuff, as well as what condition are they in? What condition are they in today? What condition were they in last year and the year before? So I can start tracking a trend in that condition. The next kind of general area is, of course, costing, budgeting, the performance of my assets overall, and optimization, and how can I really get my best bang for my buck. So there we're really concentrating on what work is needed on my assets to maximize that overall system performance. How much money am I currently spending on my assets? And for instance, how much money do I really need? Can I actually go out and justify my budget request to the legislature, for instance? And then lastly, we're looking about kind of day-to-day work and maintenance history on those assets. So how do I track requests for maintenance on those assets? How do I record the work that was actually done on those assets? What was done? Who did it? When was it done? How much did it cost? All those kind of answers. And then, of course, once you've been doing that for a while, you can again build up a little bit of a work history on each of those assets so that you can go in and look for any particular asset, what are all the things that have been done on this asset over time. So with that in mind, we typically work in a set of functional areas in AgileAssets. So we sort of break that elephant down into kind of manageable chunks when we're looking at this general problem and when we're implementing these projects. So right at the top there, you've got sort of linear referencing and resource management, LR and RM. We're not going to concentrate on those today, but those are a very fundamental part that underlies a lot of the stuff that we are going to talk about today. Linear referencing being, location, and resource management, largely looking at your labor resources, your equipment resources, and of course your materials management. What we are going to concentrate on today is your asset inventory processes. That's your AI processes, your AP, or asset performance processes, planning, and your operations. That's your day-to-day work orders and maintenance history. That, of course, all fits around a kind of core of organizational structure, and that kind of foundational core that we saw on the bottom of the pyramid there, those all fit around that core. So today we're going to go through, as I said, some of these functional areas. We're going to talk about asset inventory. We're going to talk about condition surveys and inspections, which is your sort of asset performance area. We're going to talk about annual planning in terms of maintenance activities. We're going to talk about work requests and work orders and work scheduling, all those day-to-day kind of operations type of things. Of course, recording of any work that was done for later analysis and time entry come into that, and then tracking costs and resource usage against planned costs and resource usage that really allows you to manage your operations. So let's start out then with asset inventory. So at the core of all asset management systems is what assets do I own? What assets am I responsible for? And so that's what we call asset inventory. And the basic process for asset inventory that we think about is, first out, we need to create those new asset master records in the system. And that can be done in a number of different ways, of course. We can go out and actually get a survey company to go and collect all those assets for us. We can get LiDAR and all that good stuff, and we can populate them that way. Right through the spectrum to having someone be out on the road, looking and to see what kind of culverts we have. Maybe they're doing a condition survey of culverts and they find a new culvert that was kind of overgrown before and they didn't even know existed. So you've got a range of different processes that really go into creating those master records, those asset master records in the first place. Then, of course, you've got to maintain and update those asset records over time. Sometimes, things change. You might replace a sign face on a sign structure. You might go out and change something about a particular asset out there. So you've got to maintain and update those asset records over time. Eventually, you're going to retire or deactivate that particular asset, perhaps, take it down, move it. And then, of course, right at the end of the day, what you want all this data for and what you want to maintain this data for is so that you can report and analyze it. You can go and see what is the total asset value of all my assets in a particular class. You might want to see what guardrail of a particular guardrail type do I have out here if I'm going to have to replace a lot of it, that kind of stuff. So that reporting and analyzing part of the process is also very important. So how does the the maintenance manager module help you do that? Let's just look at a basic kind of example here. So the first step is really setting up the structure for an asset type. When you're implementing a new project, you're not necessarily going to have exactly the same structure and collect all the same kind of attributes as everybody else out there. So sometimes you might have a good template to start working with, but then you might need to tweak that template. You might need to add fields to it and different things. And so the first step is really setting up that structure. How many different asset types are you going to maintain? What kind of asset types are you going to maintain in your system? What information are you going to keep for each of them? Is there any kind of hierarchical structure within those assets and those asset types? So looking at what you see on the screen there, this is a basic sign asset template. So, we can ask, are we really tracking individual sign faces, or are we really going to track the whole sign assembly as a single asset, or are we actually going to track both? Are we going to actually track individual signs as one asset type and then the whole sign structure as a different asset type? Sign assembly as a different asset type. So once that asset type data structure is set up, then of course we need to think about the data in that structure and populating that data. The first step, of course, is going and capturing all that information on those assets. As I say, you can kind of capture them once and then maintain it afterwards by adding new assets, new asset records as you add new assets. You can do a regular survey and just kind of check on it, but lots of processes go into that, and you need to think about that, of course. The example that we're showing in the screen here, you can see that this is a sign inventory example, but you can see that on the left there, you've got the sign ID and a sign type and a sign class code. But out on the right there, you can see that you've got the sign support as a different asset that sign face is actually connected to. So setting up that structure, very important, and the flexibility to allow you to set up, various different structures is also very important. And that flexibility is definitely there for the maintenance manager module. Of course, the more you configure different stuff, the more time it will take initially, obviously. But that flexibility is nonetheless there. So that sign support there is an example of a kind of hierarchical structure where you've got one asset type that is actually a child of a different asset type. So you've got sign faces being kind of children almost to your sign support assets. In the bottom half there, you can see the ability to embed a map object in your screen so that you can actually map that sign face. So as you change to different sign records, you can see the location of that sign. Talking about locations, of course, as I say, we're not really getting into linear referencing in this particular presentation, but once you do have locations for your assets, then the ability to kind of connect them up, for instance, through Google Maps, and be able to even get down to a street view level is really very powerful. So having locations on your assets is something that is very much part of the Maintenance Manager module, and being able to track those locations over time, and then being able to use those locations in both maps and, for instance, in this case, being able to get down, even connecting them up with outside services such as Street View in Google Maps. I should just say, by the way, that having a Google license will help a lot in this area, but that is relatively easily accomplished. Next thing to talk about with regard to asset inventory is building up a record history of the maintenance on that asset. So, for instance, here you may want to know all the things that were done to a particular sign asset. Well, that requires us to actually record the fact that we did maintenance on it. So, of course, the recording of work done on each asset we'll cover later on in the presentation when we talk about the operations functional area. But this is where you can go and see the results, for instance. So if you're doing a good job of recording all your work to particular assets, that allows you to come back to your asset screen and be able to look up the maintenance history of that asset. So again, just for instance, here's a maintenance history field here. It's set up as a hyperlink, and it's going to open up a little dialog box which shows you the history of all the maintenance on that particular asset. These are very standard in our system. We use them a lot, these hyperlinks to give you your maintenance history. Just while I'm here, you can also see, for instance, the record history. So you can actually also see all the different changes that were made to this particular sign. And you know, for any folks out there who are bridge folks, you know, there's a lot more sophistication that you can really go into, and you can really lock this down, this whole process of changing the asset master record through having you know, kind of staging area, and then you can go and push it out into a whole new different process flow, and only when it's all been approved bring it back. What we're showing here on this screen is a relatively simple implementation here. All right, moving on. We're really trying to give an overview of the maintenance management system here. So let's move right along here. The next performance, the next overall kind of functional area here is the performance area, so asset performance, or AP. And that's really where we are allowing you to record the performance of your assets, to record the condition over time. And so the general processes there are you have to set up that condition survey. Then you would have to assign a survey to somebody possibly and schedule those inspections. Then you'd need to actually perform the survey, record those inspections. Then sometimes you want to actually use that raw data that was recorded in the survey or in the inspection to actually calculate level of service-based indices, so that you can track kind of summary indices for your assets or a particular asset type over time. And then, of course, you really want to, again, report on that information that you've been putting in. You want to be able to track that asset performance and really analyze it and use that information to manage what you're doing. So just to give you a couple of basic examples here. So examples of condition surveys might be a maintenance quality assessment survey. So that's where, when we're talking about maintenance specifically, you might be going out on an annual basis and really doing a kind of wide-ranging maintenance quality assessment, where you're looking at all your maintenance type of things, all your maintenance objects that you've got out there that you're maintaining. You might not be able to do a complete job. This might be a sample-based assessment, and then you're able to go and take that information and really work it through your system and use it to be able to ultimately create models and then, again, ultimately optimize your maintenance in terms of your overall budgets for your organization. That's kind of a very high-level survey, a very powerful survey where you're really looking at a wide range of stuff. But then there's also individual asset inspections where you might be literally just looking at the individual asset one at a time. You might be looking at, say, reflectivity inspections of signs. And so you've got a wide-ranging amount of different kinds of surveys you might be able to perform. Those measurements are really captured separately. You want to be able to capture, this measurement that you took this year separately from the measurement that you took last year. Obviously, the very simplest version is you just update the current condition on the asset master record. But what you really want to be doing is building up a history over time. And so you want to be able to keep those inspections separate and be able to create a trend in that condition. And then lastly here, I just wanted to make the point that we can attach measurements or, sort of performance measurements or condition measurements either to an asset individually. So you might want to take a reflectivity of an individual sign and actually record that as attached to that particular sign. Or you might want to be doing more of a MQA type of survey where you're really looking at a road section and you're looking at all the elements, all the maintenance elements in that road section. And so you're attaching that condition survey data to a location rather than individual asset. Notice, of course, that if you do attach a survey or inspection to an individual asset, well, that asset typically has a location, so you're able to get back to the locations of those individual survey inspections and measurements at the end of the day as well. So here is an example of an MQA type of inspection where you're recording multiple different inspection records, and you're recording those for this particular year that you're doing your MQA assessment, and then you're also recording all the different sample survey segments that you've identified for that MQA for this year. And so this is just an example screen over on the right here, where you're looking in the top half at all your different measurements, your different records for that MQA survey. In the bottom half, though, you can see, first of all, the location map tab is what's kind of highlighted at the moment. But then you can also see all those other tabs there where you're really looking at all the individual maintenance elements on that segment of road. So, you know, you've got pavements, you've got drainage, you've got roadside, traffic control and safety, and shoulders there in this particular example. So really, this particular MQA type of survey, you're recording all that information on this particular segment. Looking at a little bit more detail, this is the drainage tab in that previous screen, and so you're really going through and recording. Just for instance, this, remember, is just an example. You're recording the condition of your drainage on that particular segment of road, in terms of, you know, ranging from very poor through to excellent at the bottom there. So that's you know, for your catch basins in this particular case. So this is just an example. Remember, all of these things that you're seeing today are examples of how the system can be configured, but it does sort of highlight some of the types of things that you might be thinking about when you are setting up your system or expanding your system in the future. Next functional area we're talking about here is planning. So planning is very important. Why would you plan for maintenance? Well, you know, that really is to do with you know, how you're spending your budget, how you're spending your money. Are you really putting it into the important areas? How do you decide on what areas are important, where you will get the best bang for your buck? There might be some areas where you know, you're really down and you know, you're at a level of service D and you definitely need to put some money into it. But less obvious might be that some areas you might have, you know, level of service A++, and you may be spending a little bit too much money in there. So being able to get that plan right in terms of your overall maintenance activities can be very important. You know, just to give you a little bit of an example, you know, some agencies out there are managing $1 billion budget a year. And so that's really a lot of money, and being able to save just a little bit of money on that overall budget is really huge. It really translates into a lot of money at the end of the day, which you can do a lot of other stuff with. So planning for maintenance, it's a holy grail. It's not something that everyone has the ability to do, but if you are able to get out there and do planning for your maintenance, this can be very powerful, because once you've got your plans in place, you've now identified what's important, how much you want to do for each activity, and you want to be able to track what you're actually doing and compare that to what you plan to do. So the first step here in planning is really creating and setting up the source data for plans. So as I'll explain in a second here, plans and the source data for those plans are actually separate things. So let's take a look at the different sources that you can use for planning. Of course, you can just set up a plan right from scratch. You can just really just enter all the individual maintenance activities and how much you want to do of each and where you want to do that particular activity. And you know, maybe you're just planning your top 10 most important maintenance activities. So you can definitely start from scratch and go manual. But you also have all these other options. And so the first one right at the top there is actuals. I mean, you know, to start out your plan, just to kind of seed your plan, you might just want to copy what you actually did last year, and then be able to know that you need to do more of this and less of this, and so be able to go and edit your plan. So that's certainly one source. Of course, not recommended, but you can also go and copy your plan from last year and tweak that. So other plans is definitely a viable source for your planning. Then you get into the more, let's just call it kind of performance-based planning side of things, where you're looking at level of effort or quantity standards. You can go out there and say, I've got this many acres and I need to mow each of those acres, say 4 times a year, so I can plan that way based on my inventory and based on how many times I want to touch all that asset inventory every year. That is a very traditional way of planning maintenance, and so that's certainly a possible source. You've also got the level of service side of things, and so you can set up level of service targets for each of your individual level of service indices. And then lastly, out on the top left there, you've got level of service optimization analysis. So we kind of pride ourselves in going all the way around that circle. So most of the other ones are relatively self-explanatory. You've probably heard of level of effort planning before. So let's just take a little while to spend some time looking at the actual optimization scenarios for maintenance. And for those of you who are out there possibly doing optimization on your, say, pavements, this is a little bit different. It's using a lot of the same kind of hardcore engine in the background, but maintenance optimization is definitely a little bit different from, say, pavement optimization. So maintenance optimization in the Maintenance Manager module allows you to set up any number of optimization scenarios. So you can sort of set up as many different what-if scenarios as you like. And for each of those scenarios, you can choose a type. You can decide what kind of optimization it's going to be. You can choose your objective function. For instance, you can choose to, say, maximize an index subject to a constraint such as your budget. Or you can actually say, well, what about if my minimum acceptable level of service is this, how much is it going to cost me to get there? So setting up what your objective function is, in other words, what you're maximizing or minimizing, and then setting up your constraints, your subject to kind of items is the next thing there. So setting up these scenarios involves that side of things, but also what data am I going to use as input? So the input data for that is your accomplishments, in other words, your actuals, what you've been doing. So you can decide whether to use my current actuals or whether I had a hurricane this year, for instance, and maybe I want to use last year's actuals. You can choose what inventory survey year you want to use. You can choose what condition survey year you want to use. So those are your kind of inputs. And then, of course, your scope. You can set up these optimization scenarios for your entire state organization, for instance, if you're a state, or your entire network, or you can go and look at specific parts of that network, for instance, specific administrative unit geographical areas or functional classes within that area. So, for instance, you might want to look at just your interstates in this particular district. You might want to look at just interstates right across the board, or you might want to look at all your functional classes within a particular district. So ultimately what these optimizations give you is a recommended activity-based plan. So it really takes all those inputs, it takes all your setup in terms of what indices you set up, what you've decided is important to you, how you're measuring them, and you'll be able to really get, at the end of the day, what is the best bang for my buck? What activities should I be doing? What's the best mix of activities that I should be doing, let's say, over the next year? And that is per admin unit and also per functional class. So you'd get one answer, you'd get it per county, per, for your interstates, for your primary roads, for your secondary roads, for instance. So very powerful. You don't have to jump in and do that immediately. You can kind of grow into that. But at the end of the day, this functionality comes along with the Maintenance Manager module and can be set up at any time, even if you don't necessarily set it up right at the beginning. Here's a quick screenshot just of one of those one of those optimization scenarios. You can see on the left-hand side there. As I said, you can set up as many of these what-if scenarios as you like, and that's all the input that we just talked about. On the right-hand side, you can see that you have constraints and your objective function. So in that particular case, you can see that the objective function is checked off as being the maintenance index. So you're trying to maximize your maintenance index subject to the scenario cost. And so your constraint limit value there is what your budget is going to be. And so you're running this relatively simple optimization analysis here to maximize your maintenance index subject to your budget. On the bottom there, you've got your reporting function, so you can kind of look and say, I want to track my maintenance index I want to track my scenario cost, and also I want to have a look and see what my person hours is, so that I can really track what is my requirement in terms of actual personnel. What am I going to have to push out to contract, for instance? So a very quick overview of that. The resulting plan is, you can see the little tabs up there. This is the setup tab in the top left there. So going over to, say, your results tab or your constraint results tab, you can see that at the end of the day, what this is producing for you is a recommended activity-based plan. So on the left there, you can see your activities, and then you can see the quantity that it's suggesting or recommending that you do, the cost for doing that, and then per functional class, administrative unit, and also right at the far right there, what is that change? In other words, am I going to increase the amount of this that I'm doing compared with what I'm doing currently, or decrease it? All right, so that's talking a little bit about setting up your plan sources, and one particular source we talked about in more detail, which was your optimization planning. The next thing, of course, is actually creating your plan. So you might have created a really cool optimization recommended plan. Now we need to get into our actual plan, and so that's what we're going to be talking about here for a second. These plans, as I said, can be generated from any number of sources, and you don't need to be doing all the stuff I was just talking about. You don't need to be doing all the optimization. You literally can open up your plan screen and start typing in your plan. So you know, don't get frightened off by some of this optimization stuff. These are the plans that you can really set up in a number of different ways. So plans really identify the work to be done rather than necessarily how to pay for it. So what you're doing is you're planning at an activity-based level. If optionally, if you really want to, per individual asset, but typically you're really doing that at an administrative unit basis, so perhaps per county, let's say, per road system. So you know, that's the typical level of planning. If you like, though, you can go and split out your plan items, your aggregated plan line item, and say, yeah, but we've got this one really big project that we're doing for this particular section of road here, so we're going to break that out and attach it to that particular section of road as an asset. The structure of a plan record, plan line item, is that, first of all, the plan line item has a plan type attached to it and a year. So you can actually, again, set up multiple different plan types. An interesting example out of, say, North Carolina would be where you have your kind of baseline plan that you set up at the beginning of the year, and then you have a kind of dynamic plan, is what they call it, that you are continuously adjusting through the year. And before all that happens, you might have an ideal plan, which is what you sort of submitted as your plan for the year for next year, so that you could get a budget request. So that initial plan there, if you're looking at the screenshot, you can choose which plan type you want. Is it your dynamic plan? Is it your baseline plan? And set that up. You've also got a year. So are you planning for this year? Are you planning for next year? Are you planning for the year after? So plan line items have a year attached to them. What admin unit are you actually planning for? So is this for this county maintenance yard, or for your bituminous operations folks, or your bridge folks for the district? What is this? What admin unit? What administrative unit is the plan for? Most importantly, what activity? What maintenance activity? Optionally, you can also put in an asset, as I said, a specific asset. Typically, again, you wouldn't necessarily want to specify individual assets unless it was a particular big job, a particular big project that you were going to be doing. And then, of course, you know, what is the quantity of work you're going to be doing, and what is the cost of that work? That cost can be calculated, so I'm not really talking about it in any great detail here. But you also have the ability to put in your performance guidelines and be able to set up kind of unit costs for work, and then populate that total cost based on that unit cost. But as you can see in the screenshot there, you can also go and edit it individually. And then, of course, you can also have the priority of that line item and whether it's approved or not. These are just example attributes. These are sort of standard attributes. If you're looking at the screenshot again, you can even go down to a monthly level if you want to. You can plan for your full-time equivalent hours, and really there's a lot of stuff that you can do in planning, and I've really just kind of scratched the surface here. But I think the secret is, get in there. You can start small and expand later. All right, and so what everybody thinks about when they're thinking maintenance management is really this operations area. So this is all your work orders. So you're identifying your work. Is it emergency work? Is it planned work? Is it some sort of reactive work where someone sent in a request to do something? Optionally, you might be creating and assigning a work request out to a particular administrative unit to take care of it. Or you might just go ahead and just create a work order directly. Once you've created a work order, then you can assign that work order and schedule it to happen. Or if it's an emergency, then you might go and you might have taken care of it already and be putting in your work order and putting your actuals in after the fact. But regardless of whether it's put in beforehand or after the fact, you're going to be wanting to record the work and enter that resource usage, enter how many hours were spent on it, by whom, what equipment was used, what materials were used, how much was accomplished, and then, of course, where you did it. That location information can be in terms of just a location on the road. But as we said right at the beginning there, ideally it would be what assets did I actually do the work on. Then, of course, you're going to complete that work order and maybe an associated work request and manage your operations in general. So this is a very busy slide, but I wanted to put it up here just because I really want to explain some of the kind of entities that go into this operations functional area here. And I'm going to try not to spend too much time. When you guys get the slides, you can certainly look at this in more detail. But I did want to give an overview of the types of entities we're really dealing with. Right at the top there, you can see I've got admin units. Those are your main administrative units, and that's really what allows you to kind of scale the system throughout your organization, and it allows you, it allows any particular admin unit, say this particular county maintenance yard, not to have to see absolutely every single work order throughout the entire organization. So at the top level, you've got admin units. The next level down is projects. So you can see projects in green there. Those are largely a template. In many ways, they allow you to kind of connect up with your ERP or your financial system. So, your big SAPs or PeopleSofts and things like that. And that's where your account strips are handled. And those account strips, those accounting codes, roll down to your work orders as you create work orders under those projects. They automatically inherit that account code information so that you can interact with the SAPs and the PeopleSofts and your financials later on down the line there. So that's the projects. You can see that each project is belonging to one and only one admin unit. Projects aren't really shared between admin units. On the right-hand side there, at that same level, though, you have these other buckets, these other kind of cost buckets called work requests. Work requests, the most obvious use of them is if somebody wants a particular job done, they can go and put in a work request, and then you can create multiple work orders under that work request. But they can also be used, as I said, for cost buckets, where you can say, I've got all these different work orders under this one work request. How much did that work request cost me at the end of the day? Very useful for if a truck hits a bridge, say, and there's all sorts of different maintenance activities across multiple different admin units possibly that went into fixing that bridge. Now you want to go and charge the trucking company's insurance company, and you want to calculate how much that cost you at the end of the day. You might not be doing that kind of in your financial system, so you've got a more informal cost bucket to use in these work requests. As you can see, the work requests, you can have multiple work orders under a work request, and those work orders can be owned by different admin units. Next level down is the main work orders kind of level. Really, that's the hub of our operations area. Everything revolves around work orders, and that's where all the costs are calculated. And so you've got these work order entities that you really want to kind of record everything under. Those can be, in some cases, actually replicated on the financial side. Some ERPs, for instance, have work orders where there might be a shell work order created for every Agile Assets work order, but that's totally optional. You don't necessarily need to do that. What's really important is the details under the work orders. So for each work order, you might have, well, as a kind of standard, you have labor day cards, what we call day cards, equipment day cards, material day cards. Actually, you also have accomplishment day cards, and what we loosely call location day cards. So those are all the details on that work order. Labor day cards, for instance, are really just your time entry. George worked for 3 hours on Tuesday on this particular work order. Equipment is similar in that, so many hours or so many miles were expended on this work order for this particular piece of equipment, this compressor, this dump truck, this excavator on the work order. Materials, fairly obvious. I used this much asphalt fixing potholes for this work order. And then locations, very important. Where did you do the work? As I said before, locations can be in terms of a location on the roadway, for instance, this route from mile point to this to mile point that, or they can be locations in terms of assets. I worked on this particular road segment asset, or I worked on that particular sign asset, or I worked on this particular guardrail asset. All right, so that's a little bit of an introduction to the entities involved in the operations area. But again, when you're kind of setting up these systems, you have to think about all of those. You have to think about their interactions with your financial system. How is it going to exchange data and really hook up with your financial system through those account codes, all very important. So again, we're kind of scratching the surface a little bit here, but nonetheless, it's useful to go through these entities here. Here's an example of the work order screen in Agile Assets. Again, it's an example. It's a particular configuration. What you're seeing is your kind of work orders in the top half, your account codes that we talked a little bit about in the top right-hand side there, those performance guidelines, in other words, your kind of unit costs that I talked about, also sort of upper right there. In the bottom half, you're seeing all that detailed information that I talked about per work order. So you're going to have a work order highlighted in the top half, for instance, and be able to see all the details, all your labor day cards, your equipment day cards, your material day cards, things like that in the bottom half. Again, just not trying to get into too much detail here, but the ability to configure different actions on your work orders. So you're looking at those buttons at the top there. You want to be able to insert a new work order, for instance. You want to be able to copy a work order using that insert like action. You want to be able to look at the scheduling for your work orders, as they're assigned to different crews. What's the schedule for that particular crew? And then, of course, making day cards, the ability to go and assign people and equipment and materials to a work order, and then automatically go and create day cards, go and create time entry records for those folks. Just a really quick overview of a particular example configuration for work orders. This is very work order centric. This is all information about a particular work order. Here's another very classic screen in the operations side of things, which is what we call our daily log screen, actually. This is a more day-based, day-centric version of that same information that we've just been talking about. So again, you're seeing work orders in the top half, but more importantly, right at the top of the screen there, you're seeing a particular date. So for this particular date, what did I accomplish? What labor did I use? What equipment did I use? What materials did I use? What locations did I hit? So this is a kind of time entry type of screen where you're seeing your different work orders as columns in the bottom half. Again, not trying to get into any details, but just getting you guys thinking about being able to think in terms of work orders. So somebody may be setting up work orders on the previous screen, and then thinking in terms about how to record work, how to record costs on a work order in this screen. So you might have a supervisor setting up the work orders and a crew lead, say, filling in this data at the end of the day. Here's another example of the previous one, just linking that work to assets and locations. We talked about, what locations did I hit on this particular work order? the ability to put in multiple locations on the same work order and have those locations kind of split out the costs amongst those individual locations if you want to get down to reporting costs by individual location or by individual asset. And so with that, I'm going to kind of wrap up. I didn't want to get into too much detail in any particular area, so I really kind of skimmed a little bit here. And just as a bit of a summary then, what we did in this webinar is went through some of the asset inventory processes, talked about making sure that you know what you have, what you own, what you're responsible for in terms of the assets, but also emphasizing that that's not the whole story. You know, just knowing what you have is not really managing those assets necessarily. You also need to be, at the end of the day, tracking the performance of those assets and using that performance to really drive planning on your assets. And ultimately, ideally, you want to be able to really optimize your budget and be able to get your best bang for your buck. You know, what is the best mix of activities that I should be doing to be able to maximize the bang for my particular budget that I've been allocated? So we talked a little bit about asset performance. We talked a little bit about planning. Again, these are things that you can certainly grow into. Lastly, we talked about operations. So you know, a lot of people, as I said, think about maintenance systems as being all about operations, but I think we've emphasized that there's a little bit more to it maybe. But you know, operations definitely is the main hub around which everything happens. That's where the most people spend the most time. And so you've got to make sure that it's worth it. You know, what are we doing this for? What are we recording this information for? Well, we're recording it for those other things. We're recording costs. We want to be able to see how much things are costing us. We want to be able to link that back to our assets, and we want to be able to see the effects on asset performance and be able to use those effects and those trends and those models to be able to plan out into the future. All right. So I did skip this, and we haven't really talked about this in detail in this presentation. Right at the very beginning, though, I said we were going to pass over resources or resource management and linear referencing. So that's a really good talk for another time, but that is definitely a whole kind of area in itself. And so look forward to that webinar later on. Let's now spend a couple of seconds in my last slide here looking to the future. So as I said, I'm actually part of the product team now, so you know, this is very much part of my radar. Getting some really good feedback from some folks out there, from our existing clients, to really start planning what we're really going to be doing in the near term and the long term. And the themes that we're really working on, obviously we're doing a lot of background stuff, but to try and kind of capture it all into one slide here, our main themes are the ones that you see on the left-hand side there. First of all, building for mobile. We completely understand that the world is going mobile. I do everything on my phone. I know that everybody out there is going to be doing things on their phones pretty soon. So building for mobile is very much a very high priority of ours. Improving the UX, that's the user experience. That's what UX stands for there. Also, really big deal. We need to be able to make sure that those high-level goals that we talked about, you know, planning and optimizing, you know, billion-dollar budgets, that really relies on folks putting in information. It relies on folks going through processes. And so having those processes really be easy to accomplish for folks in the field, for folks doing it back at their desks is huge. So improving UX is big. And then also really concentrating on our implementation processes and our upgrade processes, trying to streamline those, trying to really look to the future to be able to have not just us be able to do these implementations, but have other folks be able to help out with implementations, and even in small cases have clients themselves be able to implement their own stuff. Upgrades, very important. So the current version of the AgileAssets software out there is 7.1 right now. That is the currently released version. A couple of things that we've done in terms of mobile there are the materials manager. So I don't know if any of the folks out there on the webinar have really looked in on the materials manager mobile app. or the Fleet Maintenance Manager mobile app, but please feel free to contact us and really start looking at those if you have an interest in using them. But very useful for managing all your materials. It's all your receivables, your issues, managing your fleet maintenance in your maintenance repair shop. For the UX side of things, the user experience, we've redone our mapping completely from the ground up. So that is really destined to be a lot faster, a lot more efficient. And so that's what we're calling our kind of next generation mapping. So we've really unplugged our old mapping and plugged in a whole new mapping interface and mapping backend. Linear referencing gateway. So linear referencing, I haven't really talked about in this webinar, but keeping your linear referencing system up to date. We've really modularized or productized, if you like, the LRS gateway, so that allows us to interact with say Esri roads and highways, or any other say GIS departments that are maintaining their linear referencing system. The visual project editing tool is more to do with pavement management projects, so I won't talk about that in any detail. Moving on to the near term, the planned stuff for say this year. Building for mobile, we're really going strong on our Work Manager mobile app. So certainly some of you folks out there might have been contacted, being kind of guinea pigs and volunteers for us to really get our mobile Work Manager app up and running. So that I'm very excited about. Also integrating with Esri Collector. If anyone on the webinar has heard of Esri Collector, it's a new product that they have, which allows you to go out and do relatively simple forms, but be mobile, be able to do them on your phone. And so we're setting up the ability to integrate seamlessly with that product, with that Esri product. Going down to the UX side of things, new UI, user interface and capabilities for grid views. So you saw in some of the slides, a lot of grids in the system, a lot of being able to kind of tabularize things. And so we're going to be working hard to really make those grids sing for us, really get a lot of good stuff, a lot of good functionality in general for all of our grids throughout the system. And down the bottom there, improving the upgrade experience through developing what we're calling our Agile Core modules. So we're concentrating on an Agile Core Maintenance Manager and Agile Core Fleet and Equipment Manager. That'll allow us to really test stuff much more closely, allow us to isolate improvements that go in and not have them go out to everybody necessarily. Because quite often that's going to break someone's existing configuration that they're more than happy with and they really don't want messed with. And then on the long term, looking at Bridge Inspector mobile apps, we're looking at reporting and dashboards for improvements in UX and graphs. We're looking at introducing workflow engine, full-on kind of integrated graphical workflow engine, as opposed to the kind of configuration that is really powerful that you can do workflow with right now, but you do have to configure it. Looking at ETL tools, that's extract, transform, and load, sort of import, export tools, and then also looking to create a kind of consolidated asset inventory module in the future. So that's just a really quick overview of some of our planned and current new stuff looking out there. So with that, that is actually what I had here. So I'm going to turn it over here for questions.
Well, thank you, Charles. That was an excellent presentation on the AgileAssets Maintenance Manager. Unfortunately, everyone, we've run out of time. We ran a little bit long on the presentation. If you have questions, what I suggest you do is go ahead and type them in to the Q&A or the chat window, and Charles or I will get back to you after the event with answers. You can also email Charles at the email address that we have there. So with that, thank you, everybody. From Charles, myself, as well as the AgileAssets family, thank you all for attending this webinar.
All righty. Thank you very much, folks.